Every week, college football games hinge on a single word.
Touchdown. Touchdown, Texas. Touchdown, Oklahoma. Touchdown. Touchdown. Touchdown, Wisconsin. Touchdown. 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 Touchdown, Stanford. Touchdown. Touchdown, Alabama. Touchdown, Notre Dame. Touchdown. Wow.
This is Touchdown Radio. Here's Gino Torretta and Taylor Zarzour.
He is Gino Torretta. I am Taylor Zarzour. This is Touchdown Radio Tailgate. We're glad to be with you as we get ready for championship weekend here of the 2022 season, if you can believe that. Gino, before we get to these games, before we get to, I'm sure, your beef, that, like everyone else, that you have with the current rankings, before we talk about the Heisman Trophy, before we talk about the coaching carousel, I do need to ask you about the regular season being over in college football and your biggest takeaways from the 2022 season.
Oh, biggest takeaways. I think that we saw the major influence of the transfer portal. I think you saw, USC and Lincoln Riley have essentially used it to the best of their abilities, or better than anybody else in college football, and put together a roster, and they're on the cusp of moving into the top four and into the playoff if they win the Pac-12 championship. I think experience matters. I think we talked a little bit about Stetson Bennett and Hooker being the oldest quarterbacks in college football, and I think that matters. Experience matters, and we saw how good they played. The environment of Tennessee was phenomenal, having seen that a couple times. But I think that college football never fails to deliver year in and year out. And I know a lot of the times the major players are the same, but I think there are so many great stories, players either stepping up, the unexpected happening. And I think that we started off with that, with a lot of unexpected. And I think as we progressed through the season, it seemed like those things settled down. I would probably say this is the year that it seemed like nobody could play well on the road for whatever reason. Alabama didn't play well on the road. Tennessee, Georgia at times didn't play well on the road.
Almost lost at Missouri. Yep.
Yeah. And then, USC's only loss is at Utah. And now they got to play Utah again in the Pac-12 championship game. So I think that's something. But to me, college football has changed with this transfer portal and how quickly you can elevate your team. Let's say 2 years ago with Michigan State and Mel Tucker, and how quickly you can be on the other end of that, and it doesn't look very good for you. I think when you lose players like a Jordan Addison from Pitt, you lose a 1,000+ yard receiver and a Blitnikoff winner, and then he transfers schools. That to me is the shocking thing, is we're seeing players that are stars or have been stars at their current school and moving on to a different environment.
Yeah, that's a really good breakdown of what we're dealing with in 2022. The good news is as you said, the pageantry, the passion, the connectivity that the fans have with college football is as high as it's ever been. And you certainly feel that as you go across the country and you broadcast these games. To your point, one thing that stuck out to me in 2022 is just how fragile these teams are. 1 week, Michigan barely, maybe shouldn't have beaten Illinois at home. And I know that our friend Mr. Bielema wishes that game would have been officiated differently and thinks we would have had a different outcome. And then the next week you blow Ohio State out of the water in Columbus, just completely pounding them into submission in the fourth quarter. 1 week you can barely beat Illinois at home. The next week you're clearly playing the best football of anyone in America. We saw LSU get destroyed by Tennessee and turn around and beat Ole Miss and Alabama on the same field. We saw Tennessee have some of the biggest wins of the college football season and then get blown out of the stadium in South Carolina, who a week before couldn't score a touchdown against Florida. The inconsistent performance was one thing that really stuck out to me, and I think it speaks to what you're talking about: the transfer portal, the NIL, the lack of chemistry some of these teams have because they haven't been developed over years; they've been developed over weeks and months. And the second string of teams, Gino, are as weak as I've ever seen because second stringers don't want to be second stringers, and they'll move on and go play someplace else. If they're
you're getting outside influence. I think to go to that point, why does that happen? It's outside influence. It's hey, I can read on social media that I should be a starter or this, and I think that affects you, and obviously it's what coaches are fighting the whole time. I mean, you used to be able to, or I should say, you used to be able to fight. Just don't show you the newspaper. Don't read what's written. Well, these kids, they don't abide by that. You know what I mean? It's like don't believe anything what's ever written about you. It's like when you're good, people say you're way better than you are. When you're worse, people say you're way worse than you are. Just don't even look at it. And I think that what we're seeing is the influence of the outside voices and outside people being able to contact you as a player. And what I mean by that is, like, if you have a social media account or your parents or whatever, your siblings, people can contact, and it's just like, and your mentions and all that stuff. I mean, I couldn't imagine having to deal with that, or even, deal with it. And I can remember years ago doing a USC game, and USC, when Twitter came out, they put guy's Twitter handle, and I was like, wow, I don't want people trying to contact me or mentioning me, but that is what it is.
That's the world we live in. Georgia could lose to LSU this weekend. They might lose in the semifinals or the championship game. It's not a foregone conclusion that they're going to win the national championship. But one last thing that I would say about the entirety of the college football season is, going into the year, I still thought that Alabama was the best program in college football. I realized Georgia was the defending champion, but I still thought Alabama was the best program. That thought has shifted. Alabama's one of the best programs. But if you were to ask me, and you were to ask just about anybody that's watched college football in 2022, they would now say Georgia is the best program in college football, not Alabama. And I think part of the reason for that is because Kirby Smart, with assistant coaches, a strength coach who's turned into the special teams coordinator at Georgia, they've left Tuscaloosa in the last 5 or 6 years, and I think they brought that philosophy over to Georgia. They seem to have the most depth, the most physicality, and I would argue now they have the best program in college football. Would you?
Well, I think this is what it's so hard. I try to tell people, it's so hard to win a national championship, and to do what Alabama's done, to essentially continue to reload. We've seen talented teams, and all of a sudden it was like, wow. Then the next couple of years, you're like, wow, they're not near as talented as they've been. Alabama has kept there. And I think that from the standpoint of Alabama, is they've been getting everybody's best shot for years. And they went on the road, and obviously the Tennessee game is the one that sticks out, and it's different. And they, got beat by a knuckleball at the end. I don't know. Listen, I think you're splitting hairs between Georgia and Alabama.
Do you really?
I really do. I really do. I think, because I would just say this. I think that they had massive turnover, at least offensively, wide receiver position from a year ago, and your quarterback ends up getting dinged up. He's not 100%. Won the Heisman last year. I'm not willing to say it is. They're a big difference. Okay, Georgia's doing
big.
Better right now.
No, not big, but I would say they're the best. And I would, for every point you just made about what Alabama's lost, I would argue, well, Georgia lost their entire defense was drafted in the first round. Last year. And they replenished their team. Broadcasting both of those teams' games this year, I noticed a difference in how physical Georgia was. Alabama was the most physical team in college football. Their defense is not nearly as physical, in my opinion, not nearly as good at tackling, not nearly as good at putting the game away in the trenches in the fourth quarter as they've been. Now, that doesn't mean that in 2023 they can't be the best program again, but I think they need to make some changes in order to get back to that. That was just one thing that I noticed this year in the college football season. I do want to point out a few things before we get into the next segment.
Would you say that difference is as big as when you and I were on the sidelines of the Orange Bowl and Notre Dame ran out on the field and Alabama ran out on the field? We looked at each other and said, "Does Notre Dame have a weight room up there?"
No. Are you asking me, do I think the difference between Alabama and Georgia is
yes,
as wide?
Yes.
No way.
Yeah,
No.
That was noticeable to the average person, just like, man, what is this team?
Alabama was significantly physically and mentally superior to Notre Dame 10 years ago going into that game. I think it's close, but I would give the edge if that changes next year. A few things to mention. That I wanted to catch up on from last week. The whole Lane Kiffin, Hugh Freeze story that ends up with Hugh getting the job at Auburn. We'll talk about that. It certainly compromised Ole Miss's season at the end as Mike Leach and Mississippi State beat Ole Miss in the Egg Bowl last week. Congratulations to Purdue, who got into the Big Ten West, winning the Big Ten West by themselves and winning the championship. Surprising to see David Shaw and his program fall apart like it did at Stanford the last couple of years, resulting in his resignation. That was a bit surprising to watch last weekend. Of course, Tulane makes it into the American Championship game. They'll host UCF this weekend. NC State beating North Carolina the way the Heels season finished was disappointing. South Carolina clobbering their last two opponents, including arch rival Clemson, beating them on their own field, ending the 40-game winning streak the Tigers had at home. The Michigan win, dominating Ohio State in the second half, was interesting to watch as well. The Beavers down 34-10 and coming back to win 38-34 against Oregon in the Civil War certainly needs some attention as well. And TCU destroying Iowa State, showing that they absolutely belong in the playoff. Those are some take-homes from me from last week. How about for you?
Well, and I would say to this, and one of the things that, you bring up David Shaw resigning at Stanford.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say in the new era that is the transfer portal and NIL, I think he's the first coaching casualty where the school still wanted him to coach. And he's like, listen, the academics at Stanford are driving the athletic bus. And I think that from a standpoint, I think they've had one transfer into the program. The NIL stuff is not existent. And obviously kids are mindful of that. So not only are you having to recruit academically the top of the top, but athletically the top of the top, and essentially their peer, and I would probably say you're recruiting against Ivy League schools, which athletically they're not, players that are going to go to, the other Power Five. You're recruiting against Notre Dame, and you don't have the same resources. And I think David Shaw was. I don't know. I just think it's a situation where the university said, okay, we like having sports and we like having football, but we're not all in on this NIL stuff, and we're not all in on this transfer portal stuff, because as well as I do, it's harder than hell to get into Stanford as a high school senior. Well, how are you going to get in as a second or third year or a grad transfer? You have to be a grad transfer with good grades. You have to
and
be
on top of that, Stanford's going to have to come up with a collective and pay players as much as they're being offered to go play at other schools. That's a crazy new
money,
world.
I don't think is an issue, because we know the resources of their alumni, but I think that they're just not going to do it.
Right. Exactly. It's not an issue raising it. I don't think there's any appetite to do that.
Right.
Among their fan base. But yeah, you're right. It was a casualty. Roy Williams, I think, was one in basketball who was tired of dealing with the current climate. And I think David Shaw is one in football, and there certainly are going to be plenty more to come.
I'm curious where he lands, if he's going to go right back in, or maybe move on to the NFL, or
broadcasting,
or just retire.
something else. Yeah, Chris Peterson did it too. So Maybe that's what he does. We'll talk about the games this weekend. We'll certainly get into the coaching carousel and the changes that have been made so far. We'll talk about the Heisman Trophy. I've narrowed my list a little bit. I need your help again as I go through all this.
All right.
So
good. You'll help me.
That. And then up next, we got to talk about the rankings. People seem to have a fundamental issue with some teams ranked outside the top 4, which I don't know that we need to really focus on so much if neither has a chance to get to the playoffs. But we'll mention it. We'll go through that coming up. And we'll also tell you what a 12-team playoff could look like in 2 years. That's coming up as you listen to Touchdown Radio Tailgate on ESPNU Radio, Sirius XM, Channel 84. He's Gino. I'm Taylor. It's Touchdown Radio Tailgate on ESPNU Radio, Sirius XM, Channel 84. As we go into championship weekend, there are some big matchups. On Friday, you have the Conference USA championship game between UTSA and North Texas, and you have the Pac-12 championship game with USC and Utah. 8 more games coming up on Saturday. We'll get to those coming up in just a minute. That one Friday night, Gino, might be the one that's most intriguing to me, USC and Utah, because I think it's a de facto play-in game for the Trojans. Many look at the other 3 teams, Georgia, Michigan, and TCU, ranked 1st, 2nd, and 3rd in the playoffs, and they think there could be a path even if they lose to get to the playoffs. There is no path for the Trojans if they lose to the Utes again.
Yeah, there's no question. The one thing I can't stand, I know why they did it. You and I know why they did it, was eyeballs. But to have a short week and your game's on Friday for a championship game, you got the travel day. I just am not a fan of a championship game being on a short week. It's different than all these other games. It's harder on the bodies for the kids. The coaches have to get their game plan installed even quicker. And I hope it doesn't affect the play on the field. The one good thing being a short week is you're playing a team that you've already played before, so you kind of know what they do and what they do well and that. But that game is, you want to talk about pressure. You're talking about the Heisman. I mean, Caleb Williams has got more on that game than anything. He's got a chance at the playoff. He's got a chance to, maybe put his other hand on a leg of the Heisman and raise it up. That, I think it's a big opportunity for him, but a big game, because I think that when we look at that, I think everybody was like, well, Oregon, that speed offense against SC, we think offense is better. USC is going to be able to do it. Utah has already beaten them once, and it's physicality. And I've told you the whole season since the Stanford game when I did them early against USC and Stanford, the up front is where I did not see the USC of old on both sides of the ball, especially on the offensive line. And then if you look at Michigan, Ohio State, how did Michigan dominate? It was up front. They owned the line of scrimmage. And I think that is my question of, can they do it this time, match Utah's physicality and win the championship?
Yeah, it's a great point. Good observation by you. Utah winning that game was a thrilling game. Played in Salt Lake earlier this season that the Utes beat the Trojans in. So excited to watch that rematch. And I totally agree with you. I hate the short week for a championship game. One of the things I love most about college football, and I think I speak for just about everyone listening, is when there are a bunch of games on at the same time. It's part of the appeal of college football. And these are so spread out this weekend. And it would be fun if you had,
See, I like the opposite. That drives me crazy when I got 2 games I want to watch.
See, I love it. And you're focused, you're flipping like crazy, and you're going all over the place. And I, give me the Big 12 championship noon kick. That's fine. But 2 at maybe the SEC and the Pac-12 at the same time, and the ACC and the Big 10 at the same time. That'd be good if you had it all on the same day. I would not want a short week if I was playing for a championship. Nevertheless,
sports bar owners like it. For me, for it to have the multiple games, because I can't figure it out on my own TV set. So.
I love March Madness is one of the things I love with that. Georgia, Michigan, TCU 1, 2, 3, USC number 4. Do you have any issue with what's happening after that? Ohio State's 5. They look like they're in the catbird seat if USC loses. And then you've got Alabama 6, Tennessee 7, followed by Penn State. Clemson only falls to 9. K-State's the top 3 loss team at number 10. LSU plummets down to number 14 after losing to Texas A&M. Any thoughts on how the rankings shake out?
Not really. I don't see anything in that. I think that the question is, and like you said, you brought up, what happens if, LSU is able to beat Georgia?
Mm-hmm.
You'd have to say Georgia's still in the top 4. They're going to be in the playoff. Michigan, Purdue. If Michigan loses to Purdue, is that knock them out? I would say yes, that would knock them.
Do you really?
I'm just basing it on these committee and this kind of. I think they would say, okay, let's take them out. If
you can't put Ohio State
TCU, I think has the best. I would say Georgia and TCU have the best argument if they lost to still be in it.
Because
Kansas
they're
State's,
losing to good teams?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And Georgia has shown essentially domination for 12 games.
Yeah.
I would be nervous, on the Michigan side if they lost to a Purdue team.
Well, there's no way you can put Ohio State in before you put Michigan in. No way. I mean, not after you beat them by 3 touchdowns.
You would think. Yeah. I'm just throwing that out there of what this committee, because how does the committee, they set in literally after the top 4, okay, it doesn't matter. But they even throw out the caveat, well, 5 and 6 aren't set in stone. Well, why did you pick them? I mean, Ohio State and Bama are done.
Yeah.
They're not even playing this weekend. Now you're going to tell me they're going to flip spots or something?
Yeah, I mean, I would guess that Clemson would move up some if they beat North Carolina and they're an ACC champion, even though, North Carolina's ranked 23rd. I don't know how much good that would do, but because they're a conference champion and Penn State, Tennessee, Alabama aren't, maybe Clemson moves up a little bit. The biggest issue people seem to have with these rankings is Alabama 6 and Tennessee is 7. Tennessee beat Alabama on the field, and you look at all the criteria, schedule strength, common opponents, head-to-head matchup, they win all those things.
But they're trying to forecast because Hendon Hooker's not the quarterback.
Yes, they are. And I'm not the biggest fan of forecasting, but it's clear the committee does use who is on your current roster and who's available as part of the criteria. And I saw
which is probably why they're saying the 5 and 6 aren't set in stone, because they're saying, okay, let's look at the roster. Alabama's always had that best roster for the last 15 years. Which one is the best roster? And I think that's an issue. I think the one thing, and I told you after when TCU smoked Oklahoma, I'm like, man, they got something, and they figured out a way. If they need to run the ball, they run it to win. They've used their special teams to win a game. The defense has won a game. I've been a big fan of what TCU is doing this year, because it seems like somehow, some way, they're finding a way to win every week.
It is fun to look at what the games would look like in a couple of years if the Rose Bowl can figure itself out and we can get to this 12-team playoff. Come on, Rose Bowl, for goodness sake.
Well, let me ask you this, and I was asked this. And the Rose Bowl is different than the rest, and I've only gone to one, and that was when Miami played Nebraska in the Rose Bowl. It is the granddaddy of them all. And listen, when I played, we couldn't play in it, so I was like, what's the big deal about the Rose Bowl? They're not playing for a national championship, because we were usually playing for a national championship, and it wasn't in the Rose Bowl. I'm curious from your take, is knowing that it is the granddaddy, how don't you think they're going to figure something out?
Got to.
You know what I mean? I mean, every year,
I think there's a way to do it.
Game,
I think there's a way to do it too. You have the quarterfinals. They're going to use the New Year's Six as quarterfinals and semifinal matchups. And when you're in the quarterfinals, okay, that has to be the game at 5:00 Eastern time. And that's very important to them to keep that slot 5:00 Eastern time on New Year's Day. And that's fine. They can keep that slot, and they can be in the quarterfinals in order to do so. And then
every year, though?
Yeah. Well, when they're hosting the semifinal game, they also still want to have a game on January 1st and an additional Rose Bowl on top of, and that's fine. Figure that out. I'm okay with 2 Rose Bowls. That's fine. But I hope they do work this out so we can get to this playoff in 2 years. This is, let's assume this, Gino. Let's assume Georgia, Michigan, TCU, and USC win this week. Top
Okay.
4 teams all win. Okay.
All right.
This is what the playoffs could look like. Those 4 teams would get buys.
So let's just say that the season was over, like
Yes.
it should be, without conference championship game. Here, okay, go.
So those 4 teams would get buys into the quarterfinals. Number 5 Ohio State would play number 12 Tulane in Columbus in the Horseshoe in a round of 16 matchup, if you will. I'm actually giving losses to the teams that the top 4 beat this weekend. So I'm removing K-State, Utah, and LSU from this equation. Alabama would play Florida State in Tuscaloosa in Bryant-Denny Stadium. Tennessee would play Washington in Knoxville in Neyland Stadium with Joe Milton at quarterback, by the way. And then Clemson would host Penn State in Death Valley in Clemson, South Carolina in Tiger Stadium. That
sign me up.
Yeah, exactly. That would be a lot of fun to have those matchups. I'd love that.
Based on that, where would you go? I know where I'd go. Just based on environment, I'd want to go back to Tennessee. I just think it's a great environment, right on the water. I'd love to go there. Although, have been there in crappy weather around now, and it's not the.
Yeah, we're talking about mid-December. Keep that in mind. Gosh, Clemson, Penn State. How good would that be in Death Valley? That'd be awesome. I'd probably go to Tuscaloosa just to hear the tomahawk chop. Finally get to come to Bryant-Denny. That'd be pretty good.
Would the students stay?
The place would be up for grabs. Holy cow. I can't wait to have that happen in a couple of years.
I'm curious how that's going to work. You know, you talk about the students. Students they're on break, right?
Yeah.
What happens?
They'll be back.
Like, you think? It just everywhere though. I mean, most of like Miami's deserted when it's break.
I think the pledges will be back in uniform in the end zone for those games. Coming up next, we will go through the coaching carousel and the Heisman Trophy. It's not been as busy as it typically is with the coaching carousel, but there still was some huge moves that were made that I want to discuss with you coming up. That's on Touchdown Radio Tailgate on ESPNU Radio, Sirius XM, Channel 84. He's Gino. I'm Taylor. It is Touchdown Radio Tailgate. We're getting you ready for championship weekend. We will pick the games coming up in just a minute. Toretta's fallen apart the last couple of weeks. Needs to get back on the horse.
I threw too many Hail Marys last weekend.
Let me ask you about some of these new coaches or coaches that have moved on to new places. Nebraska hires Matt Rule. Wisconsin hires Cincinnati's Luke Fickell. Kenny Dillingham becomes the youngest head coach in college football at 32. He's the head coach at his alma mater at Arizona State. Auburn does not hire Lane Kiffin. They hire Hugh Freeze away from Liberty. He's back in the Southeastern Conference. Georgia Tech sounded like they wanted to try to get Willie Fritz away from coaching Tulane this week. Instead, they just elevated Brent Key to be the full-time permanent head coach. And Trent Dilfer is the new head coach at UAB. Where do you want to start?
Well, I would say this. There's ties. You know, Dillingham is going to be the youngest coach by, I think, 3 years in the Power 5 at Arizona State. He's got ties there. He played there, and I can see that. I think Matt Rule to Nebraska, if he can recruit and make Baylor successful, I think that this is a guy that could do that. I think he will totally revamp and change how Nebraska has done things, and that means maybe recruit some different areas. I've always said when they went to the Big Ten, they need to recruit the Big Ten areas where they're playing, and I don't think they've done that very well. So I think Matt Rule could do that, or at least he's shown, to be able to take Baylor and make that successful. He's going to have resources. Auburn, just doing Auburn kind of things, just. We heard different things the last few weeks of what they were going to do, and then it's different. Right at Georgia Tech, I thought is wise. I mean, to turn around that, because they were not a good football team early in the year, and turn around there. I thought Georgia Tech they took a chance, and Wisconsin. A little surprised with that. I don't know. Maybe Luke Fickell. I thought he was going to stay in Cincinnati, and
join the Big 12 and instead I think that's a great hire. I think he'll be terrific there at Wisconsin.
Does he keep Jim Leonard? Because it seems like it was almost like Chris left. It was like, hey, we're going to give Jim Leonard a chance to see how he would do as interim head coach.
Both are defensive minds. That'll be interesting. And Leonard's such a Wisconsin guy. Interesting to see what happens there. I'm not here to talk about personal transgressions or really to talk about infractions that Ole Miss committed when Hugh Freeze was the head coach there. I will tell you, having called their games, this guy is raided the transfer portal and made Liberty into a perennial bowl team when they had no history whatsoever. I think he's a hell of a play caller, and his teams play really fast. They beat Alabama in consecutive years when he was head coach at Ole Miss. I think from just a coaching the game standpoint, I think Freeze will do well at Auburn. It may take a little time in order to install that offense properly. But that whole situation was crazy.
Do you hold your breath? Like if you're Auburn, you hold your breath, knowing the transgressions, knowing now you have more resources than you had at Ole Miss, and oh, by the way, you had issues.
I would answer that question by asking you a question. Shouldn't you have asked that question if they hired Lane Kiffin?
Maybe not to the depth, I guess. I think both had some questionable histories of transgressions and issues. I think
that was fascinating to me how that all worked out, because Lane just started ripping on a reporter in Mississippi for not being correct when everyone behind the scenes was saying, in fact, Lane Kiffin was interested in the Auburn job. He ultimately got a new contract at Ole Miss, but that whole situation was crazy. It certainly compromised the end of Ole Miss's season. We'll see if there's any more twists and turns in the coaching carousel in the weeks to come. As for the Heisman Trophy, so I've been throwing 10 names at you the last couple of weeks.
All right.
Now I only have 5 to throw at you.
Wow.
Yep.
Okay.
Caleb Williams is my first guy that I'm going to throw at you, and you said it earlier in the show correctly, which is this guy has an opportunity Friday night, I think, maybe to win the Heisman Trophy if he plays well against Utah and puts USC in the college football playoff. He looked good against Notre Dame last week. If he has a game similar to that, I think he could win the Heisman Trophy on Friday night. I'm still on the Bryce Young bandwagon. I have been all year. I thought he had a better season this year with less resources. I didn't think the receiver play was anywhere close to as good as it was last year. This guy, you take Bryce Young off that team, I thought Alabama, I don't think people understand how different this Alabama team was compared to the last few years. I thought he was terrific. Max Duggan at TCU, I'm watching him closely at noon on Saturday. If he has a big game, I think he has a chance to get to New York and who knows, maybe even win the Heisman. CJ Stroud, I have to bring him down a peg. I thought he might have been the favorite going into last weekend. He didn't play terribly, but he certainly didn't perform well, turned the ball over. I'm still having him in my top 5, but I moved him down. And I still have Hendon Hooker in my top 5 as well. I wish we had 5 people we were bringing, and I wish we could vote for 5
people.
Well,
they may. You don't know how many. Don't know how many they're going to bring.
I wish we could vote for more than 3, Gino, because I wish there are about 5 guys I would like, and all of them are quarterbacks. I wish I could throw a receiver in there or a defensive player. I thought about Blake Corum, but he didn't play, last weekend, and the other guy comes in, he has 200+ yards. So those would be my guys right now. Anybody I'm missing?
No, I mean, listen, I think you've been a fan of May at North Carolina, and I was impressed. I watched that at the end of that NC State game back and forth, and man, that kid, for being young, is cool as he's unbelievable.
Got some Tom Brady in him.
Yeah, he just kind of, hey, nothing flusters him. Just give me the play, and threw a bullet there at the end of the game to get him in the playoffs or to get him in the overtime, but. No, I think you're about right. I think that, a few weeks ago I said, it seemed to set up for Williams playing Notre Dame similar to Carson Palmer, and he would have another opportunity if he beat UCLA, to play in the Pac-12 championship game and to have, eyeballs. I mean, I thought, like I said, that's Friday night. There's going to be a lot of eyeballs. I'm already getting calls from my West Coast people. They're politicking for the Pac-12 guy, and Williams are like, you need to watch more film of him. You think? I will just say this: the most impressive performance I saw as a broadcaster with my own eyes was Jordan Addison when USC and Stanford played. I think he had 175 yards receiving. Nobody could cover him on the field. I don't think anybody has covered him. The only time he's not had great stats is he got banged up a little bit and that. But I understand that, the quarterback is the guy delivering the ball, and Williams has been spot on. I think he's run the ball a little bit more with success, like at the end of the season, and has kind of caught these defenses off guard. But yeah, he's having a great year, and Stroud, I think, has had unbelievable games. I think Michigan State game, I saw that one firsthand, and the kid's talented. He's phenomenal. But there's a lot put on, winning those big games when everybody's watching and you don't have a great game. And I feel bad because I remember thinking going into the game, I was like, well, Michigan's got no chance. Your top two running backs are hurt. Maybe one guy's hurt and the next guy's similar ability. But when your top two backs are hurt, they relied on that running game. Ryan Day's offense relies on running the ball more than people think, and they couldn't get it going. And credit, like I said, Michigan owned the line of scrimmage.
Maybe I should put the Michigan offensive line on my Heisman ballot because Donovan Edwards was sensational in that game, and I don't want to take anything away from Blake Corum, who had a great year, but Edwards, they didn't skip a beat.
Yeah, and you mentioned Hendon Hooker. The sad part is, you got to stay healthy.
I know.
It's just you miss opportunities. Right. And oh, by the way, and we brought this up, I thought, even last year of, ballots don't have to be in until, the Monday or Tuesday after the conference championship games. So there's some guys that have an opportunity this weekend. And a lot of them don't. And I've always been like, well, is that fair for the guys? They don't have one more chance.
I think so. Yeah, I think you should be able to evaluate all of their performances. And if the ballots don't close until after the conference championship games, well, then I'm not going to vote until after the conference championship games because I want to see everything I can see, especially when it's close. If I'm trying to figure out between Caleb Williams, Max Duggan, maybe Jordan Addison, and a few other guys that are playing this weekend, then I want to see all of them play. And if I'm still thinking in the back of my mind, man, I know Alabama's not the same team, but Bryce Young was sensational.
Right.
He was unbelievable this year.
Right. The bad thing, and I told you this is I told you the start of the year
without him.
I told you this at the start of the year. I go, the worst thing when these guys win the Heisman as a sophomore is the bar is their season. The bar isn't what you're doing right now. And it's like, when Tebow came back, what did he score the year he won the Heisman? He scored like 50 touchdowns. Between running and pass, sitting there looking at another quarterback stats in one of these championship games. And I'm like, that guy has like 35 touchdowns between running and pass. I was like, Tim Tebow had 50 plus touchdowns between running and throw. That's and crazy. That became the bar. Yeah. His bar.
Yeah, you're right. It has been a huge transformation into your team must have a great year. It's the best player, maybe in most cases, the best quarterback on the best team. Somewhere Paul Hornung.
Well, somewhere
Paul Hornung is smiling, playing on The Biggest Loser ever. When my man Johnny Majors should have won that Heisman Trophy, by the way.
I think the reason people are like, well, it's always a quarterback award. Listen, here's the deal: offenses have changed, and the guy that changes more, influences the play is the offensive quarterback. He touches every down. It's not, I formation and a guy can, get the ball, 200 yards on the ground every single week. And
unless your name is Jim
Harbaugh.
Unless your name is Jim Harbaugh, who is still playing that kind of smash mouth football and doing an excellent job of it. Speaking of Harbaugh, we'll pick his game and all the others in just a moment on Touchdown Radio Tailgate on ESPNU Radio, Sirius XM, Channel 84. He's Gino. I'm Taylor. It's Touchdown Radio Tailgate, and it's time to make the picks on championship weekend in college football. I have a 3-game lead going into championship weekend.
Goodness.
Yeah, last weekend you lost some big ones. You picked the Rebels. I picked Mississippi State. I picked Tulane. You picked Cincinnati. We both won with the Beavs. You did win with Washington, and I lost with the Cougs. We both lost with Clemson. We both lost with Coastal Carolina. Holy cow, James Madison, who should be playing this weekend, by the way, destroyed Coastal. We both won with USC, and we both lost with Ohio State. So now I have a 3-game lead going into this weekend. Let's get to the Conference USA Championship game. Number 23 in the AP poll, UTSA versus North Texas. UTSA is an 8-point favorite in this game. I'm taking the Roadrunners to beat the Mean Green, Gino, and win Conference USA.
I gotta take different games, but I can't take one.
Can't do that one, huh?
No, I can't do that one.
Okay, all right, fair enough. We'll both take UTSA there. Here's a shot for you. Number 4 USC versus number 11 Utah.
Ooh.
Friday night, 8:00 on Fox in Las Vegas, Nevada. USC is a 2.5-point favorite, Gino.
Oh man, I know you're taking the Trojans because you want to see Caleb Williams, your guy, win the Heisman Trophy. Utah's already beat him once. I'm going to take the Trojans.
Okay. All right. Well, I am. You're right. Correct. I'm also taking the Trojans. I think it'd be great for college football if you had USC back in the playoff. Whole nations involved. I think that'd be pretty cool. And you got to give a hat tip to Lincoln Riley for pulling that off in year 1. Big 12 championship games in Arlington, Texas. Number 3 TCU is only a 2.5-point favorite against number 10 Kansas State. 12:00 on ABC. I am taking TCU as only a 2.5-point favorite, but I'm taking the favorite in this one.
Well, I'm a huge fan of TCU. I'm only taking Kansas State because I'm throwing a Hail Mary and down by 3 games. So I'm taking Kansas State, but I want TCU to win. I think they've had a great year. I've enjoyed their season.
All right, here's another shot for you. The Mid-American Championship game in Detroit. Toledo.
There we go.
Is a 2.5-point favorite against the Ohio Bobcats. Noon on ESPN. Wrong team's favorite here, Gino. I'm taking Ohio to beat Toledo.
You're killing me. I was taking the Cats too, but no, I'll take the Rockets.
The Rockets
of Toledo.
Very good. Okay, let's go next to the Sun Belt Championship, which should have a massive asterisk next to it because James Madison is penalized for moving up a level, ripping every team apart, including the Chanticleers last weekend. Coastal Carolina is playing Troy at Troy, who's a 10-point favorite. John Sumrall and the Trojans, what a year they've had. They should be in the top 25, by the way. I've got them winning the championship.
Yeah, you got to take Troy. And Coastal Carolina let us down last week, so
God,
can't pick them twice, even though I think that's probably bad gambling advice.
The American Championship game is number 18 Tulane in New Orleans, Louisiana, hosting number 22 UCF. It's a 4:00 kick on ABC. Green Wave, 3-point favorites. Gino, who you got?
You know what, Taylor? I'm going to take UCF.
You better hope John Rice Plumlee's hamstring is okay, because after watching.
Wait a sec, we the injured quarterback. The guy's having a Tim Tebow-esque type season. He's their top rusher and passer.
He was sensational against USF, and then Gus benched him with a hamstring injury in the second half last week, and suddenly South Florida had the lead. I'm taking the Green Wave to beat UCF.
Killing me.
Let's
Smalls.
go to the Atlanta, Georgia, the SEC Championship game in Atlanta. Number 1 Dogs are 10.5-point favorites. Maybe even more than that. I can't even read my own writing. Against
17.5-point favorite on the line.
That's a 6, not a 0. 16.5-point
we
favorites.
We both got bad eyes. It's 2 touchdowns plus.
Yeah, old man needs new glasses. Dogs on top easily in this one, by the way.
Yeah, I wouldn't say easily. I'll take the Dogs.
Okay.
Do I have 3 different picks yet?
No, you just have you have 2. So far, we have 2 games to go. 3 games to go. Mountain West Championship. Fresno State is at Boise State. Boise State's a 3.5-point favorite. 4:00 on Fox. I'm taking the home team, the Broncos.
Come on, the blue turf. Toretta's Pinole Valley High School Spartans are 0-1 on that blue turf. I'll take the Fresno State Bulldogs.
Okay, there's your third difference. Next up, let's go to the ACC Championship game here in Charlotte. Number 9 Clemson versus number 23 North Carolina. 8:00 on ABC. Shout out to my wife who asked when I asked her if she wanted to go to this game. She said, "What day is it?" Clemson is a 7.5-point favorite against the Tar Heels.
I love Betsy. I'm not sure what day it is either. I know you're going to take Clemson, but you know what? I'll take North Carolina.
Well, I'm taking North Carolina.
Oh, are you really?
Yeah.
All right, I'll take Clemson.
Okay. Last game is number 2 Michigan, 16-point favorite against the Purdue Boilermakers, 8:00 on Fox. I love Purdue plus 16. I love Jeff Brom and the job he's done. I don't think they're going to win the game, though. I got Michigan winning. A close game against Purdue.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. I think the hard part going to be the quarterback for Purdue. His brother was passed away, and he's been missing from practice. I think he's awful tired. He's going to start the game and go from there. But awful tough situation for his family, and then to not have the preparation time is going to be tough. But he's been great the rest of the season.
Gino, this is always fun. Enjoy championship weekend. We'll recap all the games next week. We'll talk about Army, Navy, and we'll talk about
the Hail Mary for my picks.
And we'll talk about the 30-year anniversary of Torretta winning the Heisman next week as well. Look forward to all of that. Enjoy all the games. For Gino Torretta, I'm Taylor Zarzour. Thank you for listening to Touchdown Radio Tailgate on ESPNU Radio, Sirius XM, Channel 84.